Hey guys! Today I'm going to show you how I painted this Black Panther using watercolors. My goal with this one was to create a piece that had a strong central focal point, in this case the panther's face. All the areas surrounding the face needed to play a supporting role without distracting from that focal point. The result is a combination of both detailed realism and loose impressionism. So let's dive into the how-tos. I'm starting with my masking fluid. I just have a really tiny synthetic disposable brush that I'm using to paint the whiskers on using the masking fluid. I try to do this with one long swiping motion for each whisker. Keep in mind that with the masking fluid, it is a little bit tricky to get super skinny lines, but we'll go back and refine those whiskers as a final detail. So I'm covering every single whisker with a layer of masking fluid. You can use any masking fluid you have. This one is from Turner. And I'm adding the little whiskers above the eyes and around the outsides of the panther's head. And I'm going to be using my Le Benzin brushes today. I'm starting with Hansa Yellow Light and my small synthetic brush by Le Benzin, painting on the inside of the eyes with this beautiful bright gold color. While that's still wet, I'm dropping in burnt sienna just around the outside of the pupils and allowing that to blend wet and wet into that yellow color. I'm also applying a little wash of burnt sienna around the nose. This is one area on the Black Panther that is actually not pure black. You do see some warm hints of color in there. Starting to paint the inside of the ears with a warm hint of burnt sienna as well. And I'm actually beginning with the eyes on this project because the eyes are the lightest in value on the overall panther. And I do like to start light to dark when I'm painting with watercolors. For the pupils, I'm using my indigo and just painting around the highlights. That's lending a beautiful realism to the eye. I'm outlining the eyes carefully. This brush I'm using is called the Itty Bitty Orange Synthetic Brush, and it is wonderful for creating the tiniest textures and details. I'm actually starting with a lot of detail in the eyes. My goal, because I want the face to be the focal point, is to start where the most detail is happening and then work outwards with less and less detail as we come to the outsides of the painting. I've introduced a little bit of indigo on the inside of the eye. When you paint that over the top of the yellow, it looks a little bit greenish. I've also added some burnt umber and hints of burnt sienna. My main color for the Black Panther is Indigo by Daniel Smith. And that's what you see here on the dark colors on the paper. It looks black when it's painted with pure pigment, but of course it is a really dark blue. Indigo is a combination of blue and black. I'm using short, quick brush strokes to create all of this fur texture around the eye, helping meld the eyes to the head. With watercolor, of course, you want to plan for the light areas first. And so you can see in my sketch on the top of the head, there are a couple of pencil marks indicating where I want to include highlights in the fur on the panther's head. I'm just working my way gradually in towards the center of the nose, using a quick scrubbing motion with the brush. You can also use more water and broader washes if you want to cover areas more quickly, such as on the flat portion of the nose here. I'm using much more watered down indigo for some of these areas just to create a nice soft base layer. Of course, I'll be adding a lot more detail over the top of these initial washes. But having the eyes already painted on and the details around the eyes complete is helping me feel a little bit more freedom to paint with big broad brush strokes all around the eyes without worrying about touching the eyes or accidentally messing that up at all. You can see I'm continuing to layer with more fur texture using short, quick, parallel brush strokes with this tiny brush. I'm just adding more details under the eyes and along the nose. It's really just a process of drawing with your paintbrush. Yes, you have an initial sketch, but what I'm doing now is really just drawing values. I'm drawing lights and darks with my indigo color. The nose is pretty much black except for a little hint of brown on the top, so I've used burnt umber for that. And you can see I've added a yellow strip at the top as well. And I'm using the tip of my brush to paint a little bit of texture right along the top of the nose, helping blend it into the muzzle. Now I've switched to a larger brown synthetic brush, and this is what I'm using to start adding more fur across the top of the head. This brush works great for flatter washes too. When you use the belly side of the brush like this, you can just dab lots of water all across and work quicker this way. This is another great way to loosen up your painting style. Of course, as soon as you introduce more water, that means a looser style. That just means more freedom and also less control. But that can be a wonderful, beautiful effect in watercolor. I'm using gradations in value on the side of the face. The cheek especially is a little bit lighter in value, so I'm starting light and I'm going to gradually build up layers darker here. The masking fluid is working wonders, protecting that area from our paint. You can paint freely all across the top of it without worrying about destroying the white of the paper underneath those whiskers. For the ears, I'm pretty much going right in with my indigo color. There are a couple areas in the center of the ear just slightly lighter in value, so I'm watching out for those. Just continuing this patient process of applying layer upon layer of soft fur texture, just using short, quick, sweeping brush strokes. These small synthetic brushes by Lebenzen are incredible because they come to the most perfect fine points imaginable, but you can also spread out the bristles to create quick fur texture such as you see here. Again, I want to avoid some of these highlights on the top of the head, so in areas that the fur is a little bit lighter, I'm using slightly more water in my mixture and going less dense as far as my brush strokes. I'm not painting them quite as close together, and I'm allowing more separation in the bristles so that we have this appearance of light next to dark. I'm adding some more details to the right ear. There's a shine in that ear I want to make sure I carefully avoid and paint around. Right here in the center of the head, I'm continuing to build up layers on top of that initial wash, being careful to miss certain areas so that some of the highlights are preserved. This is giving the Panther a wonderful appearance of looking shiny and soft. Continuing to add another layer towards the top of the head, connecting into the body. The area up above the head is going to be much more washed out, so I'm going to stop there for now and just continue building up more detailed layers and values in the head. I'm adding a wash across the top of that right ear, just darkening it one more time, and then adding a little bit more hints of green in the right eye just to help it match the left one. And little hints of burnt umber, darkening up some of those shadow shapes in the eye. Of course, I've switched to my smaller brush for this. I'm using my itty bitty orange synthetic again. Now back to the muzzle, I'm darkening up right where the whiskers are emerging using strict indigo, and I'm adding some of those little spots where the whiskers come from and some more fur detail. I had to be really patient in this process. It did take quite a bit of time. When you paint this way, where you're painting pretty much every individual hair, it takes a lot of patience. You'll find that you'll have to dip your brush in your paint frequently to reload the paint, especially if you're working with this small of a brush. It can dry out pretty fast. But if you want to speed up the process, you can apply flat, broad washes such as you see here, and that's helping darken a whole section really quickly. Now you'll want to let that dry before you go back in and add more fur details. I'm using a dark wash here to outline the jawbone of the Panther, and then using that wet paint and pulling it inward towards the face so that I can help it connect to the face with fur texture and detail. Continuing to add more layers, and here I'm going to take a larger brush. This is my Princeton Neptune Synthetic Squirrel Size 12 brush, and I'm using the wet and wet technique to very quickly paint in with indigo the dark shapes suggesting the body of the Black Panther. This is where we're beginning to use less detail. All of this is playing a supporting role, helping draw the viewer's eye into the Panther's face. And it's also a whole lot of fun to paint with this kind of quickness, looseness, and freedom, especially after you've been spending hours working super tight in the face. Whatever you do, make sure that when you're working on a section of the painting that you approach it with a sense of wonder and freedom. And you don't want to feel bored with anything, otherwise it's going to look boring. Make sure you're having fun with your painting, that you can find something in it that delights you and fascinates you. I always feel like I'm learning something new with every single painting I do. I'm coming back into the face, which has now dried, And I'm using my small synthetic brown brush again to add some more fur texture. Now I've switched back to my Princeton Neptune and I'm using broad washes to continue to paint the side of the body of the Black Panther. You'll notice my brush strokes here are very free and quick. Once the Panther has dried, you can remove all of your masking fluid. You can use clean fingers or an eraser. Just be careful that you don't accidentally smudge all of that dark paint around the edge. Here I'm using the reverse end of a brush to loosen up the masking fluid and then removing it with my fingers. Now I'm going over those whiskers with a layer of burnt umber. Some of the whiskers are darker in value and look a little bit warm in color temperature, and they're also a little bit too fat because the masking fluid made them rather clumsy and large. I'm going in with black or with my indigo color and tightening up those whisker shapes using my small synthetic brush. You can see I'm really just painting alongside the edge of the whiskers to tighten them up and make them smaller. I'm adding a dark layer to the lower portion of the mouth and adding some more fur texture under there. Constantly checking my values. I generally find I need to continue to add layers to go dark enough because watercolor does dry lighter. We're going to continue adding layers to the face using those short, quick brush strokes to add fur texture and dimension. Once again, be watching your reference photo to see where the shiny fur is and you can avoid those areas or paint with lighter paint. So I'm continuing to add washes to this cheek. You can see the indigo can almost go black when it's at its darkest value, but here in the lighter values, you're definitely seeing more of that cool blue in there. We're continuing to build up those layers, adding more and more complex levels of values and texture. I've switched back to my small brush for all of these tiny details, for the fur details around the eye, and I'm continuing to tighten up those whiskers and just add more and more quick, short brush stroke layers of fur along the side of the face. I'm adding a quick wash of water here below the ear just to soften out any edges there. And then I'm taking my really large squirrel brush again, and I'm just taking clean water and dabbing it all around the ground area in the painting. And this is burnt sienna. I'm using really big, loose, kind of messy brush strokes for the ground here. And then I'm going to add some drip effects using burnt umber. Sometimes for this to work, you may have to pre-wet the paper in order to guide those drips to go the direction you want them to go. They will flow easier if the paper's already wet. I'm also adding some spatter effect and a few little hints of green, suggesting maybe some moss on the ground. I've switched to a flat wash brush here. This is my Richardson Gray Matters 1/2 inch flat wash. And I'm throwing in some little bits of brown and green on this ground here, pulling the paint upward and sideways. You definitely want to mix up your brush strokes and mix up your textures to lend more variety to the painting and just make it really interesting. With my 1/2 inch brush, I'm just wetting that black edge and actually pulling some of the paint sideways out a little bit. And that's not only softening the edge, but also giving it a really interesting look of almost movement and motion. This is all just kind of gimmicky brush strokes, if you will, but I really love the way it looks. Again, it's all about variety and creating effects that are going to pull your eye in towards the focal point, which of course is the face. So hopefully we've achieved that today. I'm just adding a few final touches here with that brown, darkening up with brown on the muzzle of the Panther, and softening out any fur effects that I felt were maybe a little bit too rough on the side of the head. Just adding a few more little flat wash brush strokes here and there. I'm darkening up certain sections of the paws and the feet where I feel like maybe they were just a little too light in value. And I'm adding some more fur texture on the legs. This is just helping balance it out a little bit. I felt like it was too mushy and not quite as detailed. And if you guys really find these videos helpful, please give it a like. That helps me out a lot as a creator so I can continue to bring you free content like this. So there is our finished Panther. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks so much for watching.